8v8 or 11v11 for U12s. Which is better for player development? Everyone agrees that small-sided soccer is the most effective way to develop young players. However, there is considerable debate as to what age to start playing 11v11. The U12 age group seems to be the focal point of this debate. Some coaches feel that by U12, players are ready to play 11-a-side, while others feel that U12 is still too early to play full-sided soccer. Coaches argue this debate on a variety of issues, some of which are developmentally based, while other issues have to do more with logistics or economical considerations. The most important issues should be those based on player development considerations, and this is where we will start. The key questions are, first of all, what are the most important priorities for U12s? Technical, tactical, fitness? Secondly, what criteria should we use to compare 8v8 to 11v11? Most coaches agree that the technical component is the most important for U12s.
Coaches who are in favor of small-sided soccer at U12 often use the well-worn argument that fewer players on the field allow more touches per player, hence more technical development. But there is more to this argument than simply the number of touches. For players to develop technically, they also need to be challenged technically. It's not just the number of touches in the game, but also whether these touches pose a challenge.
So the real question is, which format creates more technical challenges for the players, 8v8 or 11v11? And how can we measure and compare? To get an answer to this question, we taped an 8v8 game and an 11v11 game at the U12 age group, and we analyzed these games. Both games were 25-minute halves. We analyzed by counting the number of times players received a ball in each game and compared how many times the player receiving the ball was actually pressured by opponents. This approach is based on the belief that players will develop better and faster if they are involved in many individual duels where they have to make quick decisions under pressure of time and space. Every time a player has to keep the ball away from an opponent or fight for the ball against an opponent, development occurs. These individual duels are mainly technical in terms of the ability to control the ball and shield from pressure and make good decisions. If, however, players are playing in games where they often have space and time to receive the ball without any pressure, they do not develop the ability to control the ball under pressure. Examples of pressured moments. Notice when the white team has the ball, they are met by immediate pressure. The restricted space of the 8v8 game creates many technical duels. Here we see the white team trying to escape pressure by switching the ball to manage the restricted space. Now the blue team has the ball and they are met by immediate pressure. Even a long pass into the other team's half produces pressure and a technical duel. Once again, immediate pressure following a throw-in. Now we see examples of pressured moments in the 11-a-side game. Watch the white team apply pressure on the red team after a throw-in. Here is an example of pressure in the midfield. Here, a counterattack is met by pressure from the white team. Here, a forward is trying to turn under pressure. Once again, a forward receiving the ball is met by pressure. Now, for examples of unpressured moments where players have time on the ball. Here, a defender receives the ball without pressure. Notice how much space is in the midfield in the 11-a-side game. In the 11v11 game, players are receiving the ball with so much space as shown in these examples. Here we see the player can freely turn in the midfield. In an attempt to change direction, we see an exceptional amount of space as the left back receives the ball. Once again, there's a good amount of space for the players to use in order to combine. Here again, we see the team switching direction of play. And again, they're not met by immediate pressure because of the amount of space. The player in the red team changes direction of play. And now the player receiving the ball has lots of space. He's not met by immediate pressure.
That was a good pass.
Here in the midfield, we see a ball played from the keeper, and again, the player is not met by immediate pressure. He has time to play the ball forward. Notice how much space the player has. Here, the player has a lot of space in the midfield.
Yeah.
Like that couldn't happen. I mean, at under 14, they should be playing 40 minutes. That's not long.
In this clip, the white team has a lot of the ball. But even though they have a lot of space, their instinct to kick it forward does not allow them to possess and be creative. In the 11v11 game, there are slightly over 500 times when players were required to control the ball, but only 45% of them were pressured moments. This means that only 45% of the time was the player's first touch technically difficult. The other 55% of the time, players were controlling the ball without any pressure around them. In the 8v8 game, of the close to 400 ball control moments, 81% of them were pressured, meaning that in the 8v8 game, players were technically challenged much more often than in the 11v11 game, almost twice as much. The 8v8 game had many more goal attempts. It had 18 shots and 18 crosses in the run of play. The 11-a-side game had 8 shots and 12 crosses. This represents almost twice as many goal attempts and goal-mouth action in the 8v8. Since finishing is a glaring weakness in the American game, more goal-mouth action in games can only help our players.
The conclusion from these games was that the 8v8 game was clearly more beneficial for the players from the technical development aspect, since in the 8v8 game the players had to control the ball under pressure almost twice as much as in the 11-a-side game, and the players' first touch had to be cleaner and sharper. And since technical development is the most important aspect of U12 soccer, 8v8 is better for U12s.
But what about tactical development? Which game provides more scope for tactical learning, 8v8 or 11v11? Tactical development occurs when players have many opportunities to solve soccer problems. It's obvious that when space is reduced and players are always under pressure, they are forced to make quicker decisions. Here again, the 8v8 provided more scope for problem solving and developing tactical awareness than the 11-a-side, since the 8v8 game put the players under twice as much pressure of time and space than the 11v11 game.
In the 11-a-side, players away from the ball didn't have to concentrate, since the size of the field allowed them enough time to recover and get into better positions. In the 11-a-side, teams didn't get punished often for loss of concentration or ball watching. However, in the 8-a-side game, players had to concentrate all the time. Transition was very important, since the ball was always one pass away from a shot or a cross.
The surprising statistic was that the number of touches per player was the same for both the 11-a-side game and the 8v8 game. The average number of touches per field player in both games was around 26 for players who played the whole game. The number of touches depends on the skill of the players and the size of the field. The more skillful the players, the longer the ball stays in play and the touches increase. The size of the field also has a huge impact on the number of touches. 8v8 works well if the field is around 40 by 60 yards. Smaller than that, and the ball keeps going out of bounds. And there are too many throw-ins, goal kicks, and corner kicks, which reduces the touches and defeats the purpose.
One of the biggest negatives of playing 11v11 is the amount of running required. In a typical 11v11 field for U12s of about 60 by 100 yards, each player is required to cover about 270 square yards. But in a typical 8v8 field of 40 by 60 yards, each player is responsible for about 150 square yards. This means that in an 11v11 game, each player has to cover almost twice as much space and physically work almost twice as hard as in the 8v8 game. So in the 11-a-side game, the technical demands are easier because there's more space, but the fitness demands are higher. This is the biggest drawback of 11v11 at U12. The 11-a-side is more a test of stamina, while the 8-a-side is more a test of skill. And clearly, building stamina is the least important at U12. 11-a-side forces coaches to work on fitness and to select the physically stronger players. 11-a-side teaches players to run hard. 8-a-side soccer teaches them to run smart.
Some coaches argue that playing 11v11 at U12 gives their team an early advantage by preparing them for 11v11 play at U13. This reasoning is based on the observation that in an 11-a-side game, a team accustomed to playing 11v11 will dominate against a team who only plays 8v8. This is a flawed rationale. First of all, the team with the better players will win regardless of what they are used to playing. Secondly, the transition from 8v8 to 11v11 requires mainly a stamina adaptation. The technical and tactical skill sets needed are the same. The stamina adaptation can be accomplished in the U13 preseason through a couple of scrimmages or tournaments. By the time the U13 season starts, all the teams have adjusted to the increased physical demands. By that time, the fact that some teams played 11v11 in the previous season has no relevance whatsoever.
Some coaches say, my players are ready for 11-a-side. The issue is not whether they are ready for 11-a-sides, but what is best for their long-term development. Coaches challenge the better players in practice by reducing the grid size to make it technically and tactically more difficult for them. It then becomes a contradiction because coaches reduce the time and space in practice to challenge the better players, and then they undo all that by increasing the time and space in 11-a-side games and actually making it easier for the players. For the more athletic players, 11-a-side is easier, not harder than 8v8, since they have more space and can exploit their speed and stamina. The faster players don't feel the need to improve their technique in tight areas, since the 11-a-side game gives them the space they need to run. Some coaches say that their keepers are able to punt the ball from one penalty area to the other in 8v8 play, and that's why they need to play 11-a-sides. But nowadays, many professional keepers can punt the ball from penalty area to penalty area. Does that mean we should change adult soccer to 15 against 15 on a huge field? Coaches need to look at the game from the perspective of 11-year-olds. For 11-year-olds, 8v8 is full-sided soccer. U12s playing 11-a-side is like adults playing 15-a-side on a field 150 yards long.
One last observation. In most of our youth games, whether it is U10 or U15 or U18, the keepers almost always punt the ball high and far on goal kicks. Most throw-ins are thrown down the line, and most free kicks are kicked high and far, deep into the other team's half. There is very little patient possession and build-up from the back. Keepers hardly ever throw the ball to a defender to start an attack. Our players are conditioned to kick the ball forward every time they are pressured. As a result, many of our players don't learn how to possess the ball, and they panic under pressure. They never acquire the comfort level on the ball, so important at the highest level. Even when they play small-sided soccer, they are not really playing small-sided soccer the way it's meant to be played. They kick and chase. Our coaches need to encourage and allow them to keep the ball and develop confidence under pressure. And this needs to be encouraged from the very beginning. That is one of the fundamental reasons for playing small-sided soccer.
The U10, U12 Academy program is the best time to teach our players to keep the ball and build up from the back, since we don't keep scores and don't play for State Cup. But it requires a cultural change to go along with the structural changes. The bottom line is this: small-sided soccer, the U10, U12 academies of our youth clubs, and the US Soccer U16, U18 academies are all structural changes that by themselves will not improve anything unless there is a concurrent change in our player development culture.